Blessings, everyone, for joining us on today's Pipeline Report as we celebrate the hostages being released in Gaza back to Israel, and they have been reunited with their families. And today we want to go over and talk a little bit about this. We want to get into the peace plan that has been presented, the meeting between the Middle Eastern countries and President Trump that is not involving Israel because of the holiday. And then we also want to talk about the government shutdown and what it means for this nation and how to pray for our leaders. So join us on today's episode, and we look forward to diving into this and praying for the office of the president and this nation. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, for joining us. And Zach Carskadden here, Shreveport, Louisiana. We'll have a video from Pastor Tim as he joins us from California, talking about a little bit about what's going on there, and then giving us an update from what just happened while we were all asleep here in the West and in America about the hostage release and the next steps we want to get into about what this deal means for the United States, what this deal means for Israel and the rest of the world. There's a lot at stake here in understanding what could possibly happen. We talked about it 2 weeks ago about what was then a 21-point plan has been chimed down to a 20-point plan, as there's still a lot of major roadblocks to overcome for Israel for this peace plan that is being described to go forward. And we have some reservations about it, so we're going to go ahead and dive into that here today and talk about them. And I want to start off with a video from Pastor Tim all the way from California that he recorded this morning. At the time, President Trump was giving his speech to the Knesset, where he outlined and gave a lot of praise to a lot of people in honoring the IDF and the chiefs of staff and the army there, and talking about how, they really liked working with him. Praised Marco Rubio and staying involved, and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And if you're seeing anything in the news today, you're seeing the celebration on both sides because the war has come to a halt. Now, what this means moving forward for of Gaza and the area, as now it's being called, will kind of start being discussed as you're seeing these peace agreements and peace talks that is happening in Egypt at this very moment that President Trump is at before he heads out. There was a note and a concern that Israel wasn't involved before up until last night. That was somewhat intentional, or just they left him off. But last night, the Sisi, the president of Egypt, invited Bibi Netanyahu, prime minister of Israel, to come, but he declined due to the holiday, as they're in the holiday season right now within Israel, and they really take that very seriously in honoring that. And you have to honor them for that. But he's Prime Minister of Israel is not there. No one from Israel is there as they are honoring the holiday, but President Trump is on the behalf of Israel there to negotiate. And some things we want to look at and discuss there. So, Eric, if you can go ahead and cue up that video from Pastor Tim, we're going to let it play out and hear his thoughts on this matter, and then we'll dive into the next steps as far as now that the hostages have been released, what comes for Israel, the United States, and Egypt, and the Palestinians and the residents of Gaza.
Well, welcome everybody. Pastor Tim Carskadden here from Southern California on our pipeline report. I just wanted to give an update. Zach will be running the show back in Shreveport, but I wanted to give you an update of what the Lord's speaking for us out here in California, but obviously what has just happened in Israel. while you were sleeping, many of you. The hostages have been released. Ceasefire has taken effect in Gaza. Families celebrating all around Israel, around the world, as these poor hostages have been kept captive for 2 years. It's been 2 years tomorrow on the Hebraic calendar. Simchat Torah, which is their celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. I think it's very prophetic that they're being released a day before, and that the captives are being set free. I'll give a little bit about that here in just a minute, but I think that's very prophetic. Sinwar, the orchestrator of the October 7 massacre, actually chose that day because he knew it was a holiday. Obviously, everybody would have their devices turned off, etc., but also a day of celebration of liberty, and he wanted to make it a day of massacre. He's now met his suffering like Judas did, and the whole situation has shifted now, and now it's a day of celebration. There's some negatives happening. This deal is not what we would ultimately want, but it's as good as it gets right now because of what's going on in the land. And we're thankful for the celebration today. On this day is still in the Feast of Tabernacles, the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is an interesting thing. You're preparing to cross into the Promised Land, and the hostages crossed over out of a bondage area and into a place of free, a real jubilee. And I want to speak to that here in a minute. But President Trump spoke for the Knesset in Israel and spoke something powerful. I want to play this, what he spoke, which I think was interesting about what God thinks of Israel and what he said through Scripture.
The God who once dwelled among his people in this city still calls us, in the words of Scripture, the turn from evil and do good, to seek peace and pursue it. So he still whispers truth into the hills and knolls and valleys of his magnificent creation, and he still writes hope into the hearts of his children all over the world. The God who once dwelled among his people in the city still calls.
That was written for him by a script writer, but I still think that the beauty of that is wonderful, of what the Lord's done there, and all the people that played a role in what happened there. Marco Rubio, President Trump even made compliment of Marco. I think this one's interesting as well.
And I have a prediction that Marco will go down, I mean this, as the greatest Secretary of State in the history of the United States. I believe that. I believe it. And he and I, we really fought it out. You remember, he was tough. He was nasty. Who the hell thought this was going to happen, Marco, right? And now I'm saying he's going to go down as the greatest. He will. He was always smart and sharp, and people respect him. And I have
if you remember, he ran for president against President Trump in 2016, and so I think that's good. They were once enemies, but now they're friends and they're working together. Marco's a strong believer in the Lord. That's the reason I wanted to play that clip. God has put key people around the president at this hour to have a voice concerning what needs to happen, and I'm so excited for that. I look at the cabinet, I'd say 90% are probably all born again, some of them spirit-filled. It's just amazing to think what God's done in this hour and use them to bring about this deal that just happened here, and the captives being set free. If you remember, I gave a word, I did online, but did last Sunday. And I think this is part of the fulfillment. I think it's for us personally, but I also think it's a picture. I heard the word Liberty Day, and I wasn't even thinking about this day being a Liberty Day. But in the word, here's what it said. This will be a year, starting at 5786. This will be a year that you proclaim liberty over years lost. Think about that. Those hostages and their families lost 2 years of their lives, basically. It'll be a year to proclaim liberty over possessions lost. In a sense, the family lost their possession, their loved one, over godly emotions lost, which they lost their joy, their peace, their hope. Many people did around the world. And he said, the Lord said to declare it is your year of Jubilee. I want you to do that as well. But I believe Jubilee means your slaves come back home, get your possessions back, your debts are paid. And the Lord said this, as you decree this liberty, the obstacles and hindrances that have hindered you in the past season will be moved in the spirit realm, and spontaneity will be an overflow of your life. And we're seeing that in this picture too. And I like this part of the word the Lord gave me. The serpent's actions against you or against these people and your purpose will be exposed in the year of justice and have its day in the courts of heaven. All that has been recorded by the Lord. And he said a sevenfold reparation is going to be released. I decree that right now. And I like the last part of this word. As this day of liberty is activated through your proclamations, you will experience the revelation and fulfillment of Zechariah 4:6. The witness of heaven will help you declare it's not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. As the Lord rebuilds all that has been torn down in this last season, shout grace, grace to all the mountains before you and have an expectancy that the foundation of the Lord has laid in your life. He will finish these miracles and unfold before you. And then those who observed the supernatural restoration will know that the Lord of hosts has achieved this. And I want to say that I believe the Lord of hosts was a big part of what just happened here today. So we celebrate that. For you on the Pipeline Report, we've been talking about this for the whole 2 years. We have counted the hostages. We've asked you to pray about that. And I think the world's prayers have come to pass. The courts of heaven met, and now it's reparation time. It's restoration time. It's restorative time. And we're seeing it right before our very eyes. I know there's more work to be done. We can get into that. This deal is not perfect. It's got a lot of landmines in it, as I shared last week. Hamas has not agreed to the bottom 20 on the 20 full 20-point plan. So it's not done. If you hear the television I'm watching, as President Trump is here about to be down in Egypt and work on this deal, but there's still something. There was breakout of riots yesterday among clans. People want to kill Hamas. They feel like this is their time to take advantage. There was 20 people killed in Gaza yesterday. So this is far from over, far, far from over. We have to pray now for the restoration of the land. And then, of course, all these, I don't want to say vultures, but people from other countries want to be a part of the plan of peace. They didn't have anything to do with it, but they want to jump in now and be a part of the victory. It's the story of Gideon when he defeated the Midianites, and all of a sudden everybody else, hey, we want to be there. We want to be a part of this at the end after the victory's already been taken. And you're seeing that. I'm very nervous about Britain and France and some of these other countries that want to be a part of this because they've been nothing but agitators throughout this whole ordeal. And now they want to be the peacemakers and take a victory lap with America and Israel. And I can't control that, but I just say it. I'm very concerned about that, and we need to pray that all gets exposed, and that the motives of their hearts would be exposed, and that they really probably are not standing for what's right. Okay, so that's that issue there. We pray that God would strengthen this event today, that they would finish the deal. I'm looking here and I see Marco Rubio with the president of Egypt and President Trump all there as they have this discussion. Okay, so we want to thank the Lord. That's one big topic today. Also, if you will listen to my podcast today, I had a dream while I was out here in California about the ministry, about the kingdom. And I saw that God is shifting the ministry from being a luxury ministry to being a off-road ministry where we plow and we start going in realms and territories we've never been before. I believe that's a real word from the Lord. I shared the dream on the podcast today, so you can go listen to that. Well, this is my update. Thank you, Zach, for covering today. And we're here in California. We had a phenomenal meetings down in Lake Elsinore, and with our friend Pastor Rodriguez Richard and his wife Shunda and the team there here in Rancho Cucamonga, California. This is just east of LA, and now we head up north to do some ministry up north. We're looking forward to what God's doing here in California. This is their time of revival. The political arena here is difficult, but the Lord spoke to me, and I gave words here that an outpouring of the revival will bring about a breakthrough. And the Lord gave me in a dream the story of the road to Emmaus, where the men were walking with Jesus. They didn't recognize him, and they said to Jesus, they said, we thought he was coming to redeem Israel. In other words, deal with the political problems of the Romans ruling, all the different issues they had politically, and it ended up not being that. But then after they had bread together, their eyes were open, and they admitted that their hearts burned while he was talking. I had that in a dream, and I realized the Lord was speaking through that. We in California, and even in America, we long to deal with the political oppression, but Jesus said through the teaching of his messianic call, as we burn for him, then God will take care of the political issues. And I think that's the picture we have. So God bless you. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next week on the Pipeline Report. Love each.
All right. So we want to thank Pastor Tim from joining us from California and giving us an update on what has happened, President Trump's speech within the Knesset and his praises for some of those involved. And now we want to look at steps. So if you remember the 21-point plan that we went over, that's now down to 20, points. I'm going to share my screen here and want to go over this because the portion of the plan that they're on right now is in stages 4 and 5, or steps 4 and 5, where it's so 3 has already taken place. If both sides agree to the proposal, the war will immediately end. Israel's forces will withdraw to the agreed upon lines, prepare for the hostages' release. Okay, and then 4, this one has happened or is in the process of happening. Within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages alive and deceased will be returned. Currently, last night, during the middle of the night, we had all the living hostages returned, and now they're working on gathering all the bodies of the deceased hostages. The issue there is that, unfortunately, Hamas doesn't know where all the bodies are, which is very sad for the families in Israel who want to bury their loved ones. And so they have to wait further. There were reports that the second group of hostages that were released around 10 a.m. Israeli time, 10 a.m. American time, is that the Hamas was calling the families, and this could have been worked with the IDF, calling the families to say hello to their loved ones before they were released, before the Red Cross got them. Because if you don't know what happened, the perpetrators, Hamas terrorist group, came out from under the ground. Some of them celebrated, cheering, we're losing. And what they had to do, hostages, and they gave them to the Red Cross. Red Cross did a mini examination of them, took them on a bus to a checkpoint where the IDF was at. IDF took them and then took them to a base and did some initial security checks and physical checks just to make sure they're okay. I would imagine from some reports that I've seen, they've done things, make sure they don't have viruses, diseases, things like that, so they could be around their family, doesn't spread anything. And so now they've been reunited with their families. There's cheering and dancing on both sides. And so there were 2 rounds of that. There's first a round of 7, then the round of 13. That happened second. So the living hostages are released, and now they're going to work on the dead hostages, returning the bodies. So that's point 4 here. And point 5 is once all the hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7th, including all women and children detained in that context. And then for every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased hostages. So that's going to continue to play out there. Point 6. of what's next. And this is where you start seeing come contention points, and I'll get to that after we read this. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. The members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. This is what's being talked about in Egypt right now. And I want to go back to one, and I want to get on another point here. The first point, the overall point that Israel is making sure that happens, and this is the one where everybody has questions and is the $1 million question of can this happen, is that Gaza will be de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to not Israel but Egypt. Because if you understand and listen to us long enough, Egypt, if we thought our southern border was secure, Egypt had tanks and military-grade vehicles at its border with Palestine and Gaza there in the southern part of Israel, so that there would be no open borders for people to come across, even though they would come through tunnels and et cetera, things like that. But Israel and Egypt and Jordan don't want these people for... This is the $1 million question. Can the people of Gaza be de-radicalized? The people of the West Bank, Judea, Samaria do not want these people who are in the lower portion of Gaza, southern portion of Israel, to come up to the West Bank, which is closer to Jerusalem and Syria, away from the Mediterranean and away from Egypt up there. If you understand the map there, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So we see this play out. This is where we really want to pray for President Trump, because there was a report that came out of the New York Times, and I'm going to share this. This is from Jonathan Tobin of JNS, which is a Jewish news syndicate, and he talked about in his post today that, and this is the point we want to understand, Qatari leadership of Hamas came out and said, look, just because we're giving up the hostages does not mean this is over. The war is over. And this is where we really need to pray for Trump, because, and Jonathan Tobin points it out here, he said, many observers have assumed that the hostages were the only leverage that Hamas still had in negotiations with Israel and the United States, but it's clear now that this might be wrong. Perhaps with the prodding of their Qatari founders and allies who have, this is very key, with the help of Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner, wormed their way into President Trump's good graces. The terrorists have realized that their cruel insistence on holding onto the hostages was actually an impediment. So they looked at them as a roadblock to actually being able to fight in this war, continuing on to their potential survival. How is that possible? It's simple. The advantage that Hamas now holds is twofold. This is very key. This is where we need to pray for President Trump. One is that Trump is eager, even desperate, for the ceasefire to hold, to keep playing the role of the world's leading peacemaker. Because Israel is celebrating that he's a peacemaker. The Gazans are celebrating he's a peacemaker. And if we know anything about Trump, he likes being right. The article continues. It says, this is a title he will lose if, as he has also promised, he will give the green light to Israel to obliterate Hamas if it fails to disarm and give up control of Gaza. So that's what's going to be discussed, giving up arms and who's going to control Gaza now moving forward. Trump and Israel are advocating for the United States and the IDF to be involved of destroying tunnels, taking away weapons, de-radicalizing people. But if you've ever read this book, I brought it today, The Son of Hamas. It is the author's name. It's his story, life story, Musab Hassan Youssef. He is the son of one of the Muslim Brotherhood's founding members of Hamas, who still is one of the leaders of Hamas, And he comes out and says, because one, he knows who these people are firsthand. He's related to these people who are in the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And so he has a unique perspective. And there's a clip and an understanding that he has that I want to play here, where he gave a couple of days ago with Chris Cuomo, that I really want to share here because it tells the perspective of, okay, this deal's gone forward, that's great, but now what? And he gets pretty adamant. So I want you to hear him to understand this is what somebody who still lives in the land, in Judea and Samaria, thinks about what will happen moving forward.
So, what does the Green Prince think about the prospects with Phase 1 really happening and what it means about what could come later? Mossab Hassan Youssef joins us now. My brother, good to see you. Give it to me.
Hi, Chris. Well, first of all, I would like to thank President Trump for his efforts to secure the release of the hostages. This is the good news. On the other hand, the situation in Gaza and the future of Gaza is in the hands of a barbaric group, that they're going nowhere. Gaza is their breeding ground. And if we don't evacuate civilians, and please to listen carefully, if we don't evacuate civilians, Trump's original plan to relocate the Gaza entire population, there's going to be Hamas. And if it's not Hamas, there's going to be Islamic Jihad. If it's not Islamic Jihad, there is going to be a communist Palestinian fanatics with intentions to wipe Israel off the map. They are too close to Israel, and you cannot mix both. It's impossible. We saw what they did on October 7th. I grew up among these people. My father is one of the founders of Hamas and still a top leader of Hamas organization. When Israel used to come to arrest him, dozens of times, they always respected women and children. They waited outside the door for women to dress up because they respected the culture. Now, the rules of engagement in Gaza is completely different because Hamas used their own children as human shields. Mm-hmm. And then they accused Israel of committing suicide, and the world...
So I think that's a very interesting perspective there that we see from somebody who is family members of one of the founders of Hamas and knows those who are in leadership there. The reason we needed to play that was to hear his voice. I think his voice is very key right now. And the article I read from JNS and Jonathan Tobin there is an interesting perspective. I believe it's partially true, but then it's also partially not. So we see, and he's talking about a New York Post article that came out from a Qatari side and talked about where the Hamas leadership felt on this matter. Why is that important? Is because we know Trump, and why is what he said important? Is to know that Trump is obviously, as we all can be, look, we all can fall to that at times. It's not to bash him, but it's to say that this is a weakness of his. We saw this in his first term, and the claim before he came into office and the fear from your moderate Republicans was that, he's going to start all these wars. How dare he get a hold of the nuclear launch codes and be able to press the red button. Oh, no, he's going to get us in all these wars. Well, he's actually doing the opposite. And I think it's actually does that. And before this deal was done, he could say, I ended 7 wars. Now I end 8. And now that could possibly be in question with how Hamas, and so Hamas is going to use every opportunity to tear this down, tear that verbiage down. And So we see that there. So I want to build that point of view up. That's something to pray about, that President Trump's pride doesn't get in the way. And the fact that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are now involved are something very, very problematic. And what Trump's trying to do, first and foremost, is to get the Abraham Accords back into play. That's where Jared Kushner comes in. That's why he's there. He was actually in Israel on the ground. There's photos of him waiting with President Netanyahu as Air Force One landed at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. So Jared Kushner is heavily involved. The reason we have to point this out is because Trump tends to listen to what Kushner says. And the fact that he's back involved in this as an advisor is something we really need to pray for Trump and the cabinet. And this is where we want to pray for Marco Rubio to have more of a voice here than Jared Kushner. Rubio understands the players of the game a lot better than Kushner because, in this sense, Kushner has a lot at stake here personally because he has a lot of investments involved here, whereas Marco Rubio, what we know of, doesn't. Hopefully he doesn't have some shady deals going on in the back, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. But now we see President Trump have a weak point there involving and moving forward of de-radicalizing. And to Masan Youssef's point is, okay, what do you do with these people? I saw another interview with him is, okay, you take them away. The only people left that you could say who could be not are the babies in the children that have been radicalized. And what we're seeing with the reports Pastor Tim talked about, the clans within Gaza who are tired of this, who don't want to be used as civilian shields, who were not allowed to leave. There are a few of those, so not everybody there is, but a majority of them are a part of Hamas. That's the concern. Now, whether were they there off their own free will to be a part of Hamas, or were they there with a gun to their head? That's $1 million question. What we're seeing here now is a potential divide here with these negotiations moving forward. The reason I want to talk about this in this manner is because this is a point of, okay, how do we pray? There's a lot of jubilation. There's a lot of things to praise, and we want to do that as well. We want to praise this peace deal. I mean, Trump did it. Nobody else did it. Biden could have done it. He didn't do it. But now here we are. The caveat to that, the opposite side is the part where Trump says, if you don't release these hostages and if you don't lay down your weapons, we're going to obliterate you, will happen. And I'll give this point. If you're following anything that's going on in Ukraine right now, Trump wants the same thing. He wants the war to stop between Ukraine and Russia. Trump has also come to the understanding that Russia is not stopping. He knows what's happening with the Ukrainian people and how they have resisted to protect their freedoms and their land. And now there are reports that the United States is giving higher level weapons to Ukraine and allowing them to go in and take out some key strategic natural resources, energy plants, things such of that nature, to help benefit Ukraine. So the reason I want to give both of these sides is because, okay, there's a point where Trump, if he's going to be super prideful, he could possibly say, okay, in this war, Israel, and the thing we don't want, and I wanted to bring this book, is there's time and time again when the United States has agreed to possibly divide the land, that there has been a natural disaster. And we have prophetically been warned that if it happens, it will not go well for the United States. And this is a book from William Koenig. We've talked about it before, Eye to Eye, that reports in detail every single incident where the United States has tried and agreed to split the land of Israel, how there has been an economic and or natural disaster that comes towards off of the biblical principle found in Genesis, where it talks about those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed. That has brought a lot of contention. And then you get into Romans 11, where in the New American Standard, it talks about Romans 11. It's titled, Israel is not cast away. And it talks about, Paul is talking about there how even though, they sinned and the Lord allowed them to be broken off and us grafted in, the root there still goes back to the Abrahamic covenant that the Lord made with Abraham in Genesis. And so we have to understand that and I give those two references of Old and New Testament, and you can go further and further on. There's also John 4:22 that talks about salvation is from the Jews. And the reason I bring this up is because there's a lot of people online trying to have this divide, and have talked about it before, of this Judeo-Christian understanding that we have here in the West, saying that, well, that can't be such a thing. There's no such thing as a Judeo-Christian. You are only a Christian. Well, the problem with that is the New Testament is, if you want to put it in a way, is a reading of the Old Testament, which come from Jewish understanding. And obviously there's a kingdom mindset there that we have to understand. That's not just Judaism in and of itself, because if you get off and you understand Judaism a little bit, there are some sects where they get off, and the Lord rebuked them for that. And then in Romans 11, it talks about he, broke them off there as well because of those things where there have been idols that have been made. You see in Jeremiah and Ezekiel where they were sent off. I mean, the whole Daniel is a representation of that. But the point is, I want to get back to, is that Israel's at a point where, and Trump specifically, what we want to pray for our leaders in this issue, is Trump's at a point where if he's not careful, his pride will let him get in the way. And if this president of peace, getting praises from Israel, he's their billboards blasting him, praising him. And does he hold on to that point, or does he hold on to the point of let's bring real peace and more of a re-looking at it? And I talk about that because we talked about a few months ago from Chuck's Passover Prophecies book. He talked about how there needed to be a reimagination, a recreation that talks about in Isaiah 5, where like the founders of America, they kind of looked outside the box. And Trump's doing that and looking at things in a different way. And this is one of those ways. We want to pray that he stays into that. We don't just want to say, oh, don't give in to your pride. Okay, Lord, help him and help his people around him. Make sure he doesn't fall prey to his pride, but more so stay in that place of humility as he walks out with Israel, with the countries in the Middle East, about what steps to take. Because I think it's going to take a reimagination of what is happening. It's going to take a recreativity that I don't think anybody's thought before. And that's one of Trump's strengths, and we have to honor him for that. And the families there are very honoring, and there have been a lot of attacks on Netanyahu and President Trump. And look, they haven't, and this is not to say that Israel's done everything perfectly. There have been some mistakes, and Israel has admitted to them, where they have, in bombing churches and different things. But it's war. That's bound to happen. Not out of intentionality, but out of a misfire, et cetera, things. If you don't think America didn't do that in World War II and in any other war and any other conflict that we've been involved in, I mean, you're talking about humans. Unfortunately, it's bound to happen, even though there are engagements of war. And so I say all that is there's a lot to praise here. There's a lot to be thankful for in this moment of freeing of the hostages. But this is not over. You also have in these negotiations France coming to the aid of Hamas in trying to negotiate them to ultimately stay in some form of power and not give up their weapons. Because in this article in the New York Times, it talked about how Hamas knows that if they give up their weapons, they're defenseless. Well, okay, I could kind of understand that. I would agree here as an American who very much agrees in the Second Amendment. But it's also a point of is for over 70 years, the Palestinian Authority, the people in Gaza have had an opportunity as refugees to figure out where to go, what to do with their nation. And they have chosen to seek donations from the world, enrich them. Their Qatari leadership has chosen to enrich themselves to the the tune of billions of dollars for their top leaders, several of their top leaders. Meanwhile, you have, in the words of Massad Youssef here, that you have people sleeping 20 to a room and in a house, if you saw what they were, so that their overlords can live in luxury in Qatar. Now, I say all that to say of the reality of what's happening here. And I know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio understands this, President Trump understands this, and that's where we want to pray for Marco Rubio's voice to take a higher level of authority that over Jared Kushner's, who's not an official cabinet member here, and that's something we want to be very, very wary of there. And so hopefully in this, we can celebrate the hostages being freed. We can celebrate the reimagination of what's going to happen for the people there in the land. And I think they ultimately want it. And the fact that they're coming out, the reports of them coming out and having clashes with Hamas itself as they come out of the tunnels, I think shows that the civilian population is fed up for those who aren't engaged in it, in fighting Israel. So that's very key there. There's some things that are happening. And when you start seeing a revolution come, you see this in Iran, of the people tired of it, wanting to stand up, wanting not to go along with it anymore. That's a very positive news in and of itself. And even though it's costing lives, it's a thing of, okay, finally they're tired of it to where they're willing to stand up. And that's a benefit of this. Now, how do the world leaders go about doing this? And this is where we want to pray for humility for President Trump. So hopefully that explains that situation there. Let's continue to pray for President Trump there as we continue before we close here. And the last thing we want to talk about is back here on the home front. We're seeing Speaker Mike Johnson dealing with the government shutdown and trying to pull votes back, trying to pull both Democrats and Republicans back in to continue to operate the government. Now, the Democrats for decades, and speaking of just the last 5-7 years, have talked about, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have talked about how you can't shut the government down, how horrible it would be that were to happen. And yet here they are doing that and shutting it down. And Speaker Mike Johnson understands this. He's willing to let this go on and saying what he said is 98.9% of Republicans want this to go on, in making sure that we don't get in these, what they're saying, and I would agree with, the atrocious JCPOA, the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act funding in there that needs to be discussed next go around. And these are kind of some of the agreed upon terms when former Speaker of the House was in there on the Republican side, Kevin McCarthy. And so Mike's just kind of trying to continue that, but then also starting the shift little by little. And what we want to really pray for here is that the American people, those who on the right and or the left, because there is a growing contention point of those on the right who are trying to cause division here, right, on this issue and more specifically on the Israel issue. But speaking of this government shutdown, and because when it comes to midterms, and this is why Democrats are doing this, because they're going to sit there and say, look, Republicans wanted to shut down. They didn't want to agree to giving you health care. They didn't want to agree to giving you the things that you needed. They're going to use that. This is all about 2026, because if they can get people in office who can prevent the easy passage or easier passage as they have now, and the prayer here is, look, Lord, what the enemy meant for evil, God, you can turn it for good. And Mike's going to have to be resolute in that. We know Mike will. We want to continue to pray for him on this issue. And the good thing is, if you've seen the reports that the government's been able to basically get away with, President Trump has been able to get away with some of these jobs and rumored to never be able to bring them back. So it's a win for Trump. So there's a lot of things here. And if there's anything, and the reason I bring all this up with Israel and the government shutdowns and Trump winning a lot, is when we saw this in his first term, He won a lot, and then in his eyes, and then the COVID happened. And then his pride got in the way, and he listened to voices that he shouldn't have listened to. And then you had the government shut down, government overreach into the Biden administration, and so it really hurt him. And so if we see anything from his first go-around of a template of what good Trump, bad Trump, if you remember Ben Shapiro when he would do that, is good Trump is when he's right and he's humble, he can stay focused. And I think the people around him can help him in that. And he has a lot better people than he had in his first go-around. Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, is doing her best, is what she called from day one, to keep the crazies away from President Trump. You're not seeing the big circuses that you are. Obviously, the big blow up with Elon Musk there is been calmed down there, and Elon Musk, looks like he's coming back with his tail between his legs, of understanding there's a different way of negotiating with Trump right now. And so we also want to pray for those in the cabinet and around Trump who are advising him as well, and Melania as well, of making sure she's still able to have a voice over some of the other outside voices who were within his family who would advise him otherwise based upon kingdom principles. And look, for those who, I know this is a big contention, especially with the younger generations, of how can you be America first if you're advocating for Israel? It seems super simple in that, you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. But Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu talked about how, with Ben Shapiro in an interview they did, how countries need allies. And if anybody's ever seen the movie Argo, I showed that to my wife this weekend. It's a great example of this, of how during the Iranian Revolution in 1979, where there were U.S. embassy workers who were taken hostage, but then 6 of them got out and made their way to the Canadian Prime Minister's housing in Tehran, Iran. And they were able to keep it secret for a while, and eventually they were able to get them out. And all credit went to Canada at the time until President Bill Clinton declassified the files about the Operation Argo and the release there. And my point of bringing that up is to show a somewhat modern example of how allies can actually be beneficial, and more so to speak against this idea of isolationism, we just need to not worry about other countries. Don't worry about what goes on in the Middle East. That is the most barbaric thought process. I'm sorry if you believe that. One, the Argo issue, but then if you go back to our initial founding, is we wouldn't have had our revolution against the British if it weren't for countries like the French. The British were also working within the group of people called the Hessians, who were ultimately Germans, to fight for us. And then you had the Barbary pirates, who were kind of reigning the high seas and attacking American merchant ships, British merchant ships, any merchant ships, to steal the loot. And that's why you have the advent of the Marines. That's why you have the advent of the Coast Guard. And we had this understanding of when those organizations, those branches of the military were started, is you want to keep those wars over there. You don't want to have them come here. If you isolate, you have the potential of that coming here. And I'm being very, very brief in talking about the history here of the nation, because I think we have to understand that this simple idea of, let's not worry about the rest of the world, let's only worry about ourselves. We have $37 trillion in debt, and that's what we need to focus on. Again, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, because at the same time, we have $37 trillion in debt. Just because we fund another nation doesn't mean that that's the reason we're $37 trillion in debt. If we look at things like Social Security and entitlement programs, those are far bigger spenders than government aid to other countries. Now, are there other countries that we need to look at? Possibly. In the words of John Kennedy, famous senator from South Louisiana, who says that there are countries who hate America, and we need to stop giving them money to hate America. We need to let them hate America for free. And I think those are wise words and absolutely true in this moment. And President Trump's doing that amazingly, and getting other NATO countries to step up and fund NATO itself rather than have America do it with getting nothing in return. And to the point for anybody who has questions about whether with the United States funding Israel, is what America is doing in that is, yes, funding Israel and their military, giving them weapons, but what they're also doing is allowing Israel to give information back about those weapons, to develop said weapons, to deal with some of the attacks coming from Iran that you're seeing in Russia, because of Israel's help, Ukraine was able to help and stop the Russians who were using Iranian weapons, and because Israel knew that, they shared that intelligence with Ukraine and stopped them. That's why they're able to be at the place that they're in. And U.S. is getting that same intelligence back. And so the whole thing of R&D there is, look, America's not in war right now. And so in order to prepare, because if you've heard anything about the military, you've heard about China developing weapons, Iran developing weapons, Russia developing weapons, and those are countries involved in some conflicts there, especially with Russia and Iran. China's kind of staying on the back burner for a lot of reasons. But the reality is, and the reason I bring all this up is to kind of say and if you heard Scott's message yesterday about having hope, but one of the key points is we have to start thinking, and I know you guys know this, but it's just a reminder, is we have to start thinking in a kingdom mindset. Thy will be done, thy kingdom come, as the King James Version says there in the Lord's Prayer of Jesus teaching the disciples, about, like Trump, having this reimagination of this problem that has persisted. Okay, let's just have peace, divide the land. That's what's been thought about before. No, let's reimagine what can happen in Gaza. If somebody else came into power, if Hamas wasn't ruling there, let's not forget that. A lot of people are saying let's let the Palestinians have a chance to figure this out for themselves. We've done that 2005, 2007, and this is the result of that. And so I think we even have to reimagine that, and there have to be some parameters of, hey, you have to lay down your weapons, which is what Trump and Israel are saying. The million-dollar question is, will that happen? And that's something we want to pray about. That's something we want to stand for, and pray for the people in Gaza, in the Judea and Samaria there, who are fighting for their survival, fighting for their existence, of what does the land look like? These clans are fighting with Hamas now. What does that look like for them? How can they stand up? How can they have a voice in these negotiations? How can they have a voice to possibly stand up and be leaders there? And hopefully there are some of them there who can radically and for their protection save their people from having to go down this deep, dark road of this terroristic mindset that is ingrained within their culture, as Massad Youssef would say. And so I lay all that out there, and we rejoice for the hostages being released. We rejoice for a reimagination of what's coming in the land. And we continue to want to pray. We need to pray for President Trump, those around him. We want to pray for an advancement of Marco Rubio's voice and voices like his, who will, with an unbiased perspective, be able to have the ear of the president and speak for sanity in the region. And I know there's a lot of other world leaders that you can look at and pray there, but we as Americans need to pray for our leaders, and President Trump is our leader. And if you know people in other nations, have them pray for their leaders, especially France, the UK, and there's a big uproar in the UK about this stuff. There's a big uproar in Australia about this stuff, as their governments in South Africa, as well in Germany, of how their leaders have taken the side of Hamas here. And so let's continue to pray for our president and our leaders on this Israel issue and on the government shutdown issue, that the truth can come forward, and more importantly for the voters who in this next go around, come the midterms, will see through the lies and see through things that are truly as they are, not as they're being presented and being persuaded just for the vote's sake. And if we saw anything from this last election, that if we continue to go down this road of having people like Speaker Johnson just speak the truth, be out there, that it works amazingly, despite what former Republican leadership would say of, oh, you can't speak the truth. You gotta kind of play politics here. Mike's just saying, hey, we're speaking the truth. They thought he couldn't fundraise. He's been able to fundraise. So I'll close with that. I'll end with that. Thank you each and all for joining with us as we continue praying for the office of the president, for this nation, our leaders, and for the peace of Jerusalem as we celebrate this historic deal that Trump was able to start. And as we go further and further down the points there, I mean, again, I talked about it at the beginning. The first point is the most contentious point of can Gaza and Judea and Samaria be de-radicalized? That's a huge point. Something we want to pray there for those voices who will allow it to be de-radicalized to stand up, and then for Speaker Johnson to hold the line, and for the American people to see through the lies and what's to go forward. Because even those who had libertarians who have this mindset of, yes, we have $37 trillion in debt, they're right. That is something to be worried about. But then also we have to look at, okay, you can't bash the leadership who's trying to deal with that at the same time as trying to get your agenda pushed through just because you disagree with them on one issue. And now obviously Israel is that main issue. So close with that. Blessings to each and every one of you for following along today. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe with anyone who you feel like needs to help hear this and help share this message and give this kingdom perspective on what's going on in the news, and for those prayer warriors out there who are looking for voices and looking for somebody to join with in praying for our leaders, not only on the Israel issue, but on the government shutdown issue, on a many, many more. So blessings, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.